Alright, this video is going to go over changing IP addresses on Windows and Linux using both the graphical tools and command line tools. So before we get started, we want to make sure that our VMs are working and on the same subnet. So the way we're going to do that is just a quick little ping. So if we want to know the IP addresses we are going to pinging, we use ipconfig on Windows. Let me warn you, if you are using your base Windows as the system and not using the Windows VM, you will have multiple interfaces showing up due to the virtualization software. So make sure you choose the interface that is your actual IP address of your system, of your actual interface, because we should be using the bridged networking. So in this case, I'm using the 2VM method. 172.16.99.218 is my Windows IP, and I can use ifconfig to get my Linux IP address. And if you're like, Rich, why are you using ifconfig? That's been deprecated. You're right. I can also use ipadder_list. That's the new way they want us to do it. And then I see my IP address is 172.16.99.221. So I'm going to ping 172.16.99.221, and that works. And then from Linux, I'm going to ping the Windows IP address. You might be thinking, Rich, if you just ping from Windows to Linux, then obviously a ping from Linux to Windows is going to work, right, Rich? Well, I ping, and it's not working. And the reason it's not working is the Windows firewall is blocking those pings. So go back to your Windows machine, and in the interest of brevity, for now, we're just going to disable the Windows firewall. If you are doing this on your base, open pool. If you're doing this on your main operating system, you may want to I don't know why that wasn't opening. You may want to make sure you turn it back on when you're done. So for now, we're just going to turn it off, like I said, for simplicity's sake. And if we go back to our Linux VM, now the ping is working. As you hopefully remember from previous classes, in Linux, ping keeps running into kill it, and you can kill it with Control-C. So that is the first thing we want to do. Just make sure it's working with the IP addresses you have. If it is not working with the IP addresses you have, you probably should not proceed, because it is very unlikely it is going to work once you change the IP addresses. So Windows, we've been changing IP addresses for 2 semesters before this, so hopefully you know how to get to some way to change them. I'll always click down here and then click on stuff until I can find where it says change adapter options. So change adapter options, and then we're going to go into the E0. We want to properties. Is that what we want? Yeah, properties, IPv4 settings, and we are going to configure that. That's not what we want to do. I double click that. That's how that came up. I thought I could hit like something. So double click that, and we will click here to statically set an IP address. So in this case, I think I told you my number lock key is not working. I think I told you to make it 99, something in the 192.168.99 address. So I'm going to make mine 99.5 because 5 is my favorite number. The default mask for Class C is 24-bit mask, so that is fine. We do not have a default gateway because we are not leaving our local area network, so we'll leave that blank. So hit OK. OK. If you're really paranoid, you can use ipconfig to make sure it was changed, which might save you problems later in life. So now we need to go change the Linux VM. To access the Linux network settings, if you click up here on this power button, it drops down a menu. And if you go to wired connection, wired settings, that brings up the graphical way to change the Linux IP address. Right now it is set to automatic. Yours probably was set to automatic at the beginning. So we go IPv4. We're going to set it to manual. We're going to type in an IP address. It needs to be on the same subnet, so that would make it 99 dot something. I'm going to go with 6 with a 24-bit net mask. And no gateway, again, because we are not using a router. Yeah. So I hit apply. I'm going to open that back up to make sure it was saved. It's there. I hit apply again, but when I open that up, did you notice it still has the old IP address? And if I go to the terminal and check my IP address, it's still the old IP address. So in this version, in most Linuxes, once you make changes in the GUI, you actually have to turn it back off and back on again before the settings take effect. So I turned it off, and I turned it back on again, and now I have the right IP address. So if you have problems and the IP doesn't change, make sure you turn it off and on again. So now that we have changed the IP address, I will use ping to ping the new IP address of the Windows machine, which is 99.5. Oh, that worked. And then from Windows, for fun, we'll ping 192.168.99.6. So let me actually type the command correctly. So there we go. All right, so that's how we do it with graphical tools, but there might be times when you need to do it with a command line tool. So I'm going to show you some command line tools you can use for changing IP addresses on Windows and Linux. First thing we need to do on Windows, we need a command prompt that's running as administrator. Some of you guys have had my classes know how much I like to do things that fail and then be like, oh, look, it failed. We need to do this other thing first. But that's frustrating to some people, so I won't do that yet. But you might want to look forward to that in the future. So you need an administrator command prompt. Why? Because a regular command prompt doesn't have permissions to make that happen. The command we can use to change at the command line is netsh. And there are two ways to use netsh. You can use it interactively, where you type netsh and hit enter, and then get into this interactive mode where you can type different keywords. Here I typed interface to put myself into the interface context. It gives me a warning about how I should probably be using PowerShell to do this now. I'm going to ignore that. I did not want IPv6, so I'm starting over again. Interface. I want to be in IPv4 context. And now I want to do some stuff. If you hit the question mark, it gives you some context-sensitive help. So if we scroll back up and look at this, it tells us the different things that are available from the netsh context, from the interface context. But we are in the IPv4 context, and what we want to do is we want to set something. So we type set and hit the question mark. It gives us our different options. So you can read those and try to figure out what you're looking for if you're doing this on your own sometime in the future. But I know we want to set address. So we're going to set address. I hit the question mark again. It gives me some context-sensitive help about setting the address. And the most important thing it gives us is a couple of examples. So in this case, we want to set address. We're going to set a static address. So we're gonna kind of combine the two settings. Name equal, and it has a quote, and then it says wired Ethernet connections. You need to use whatever your Ethernet is actually called. On this VM, it's called Ethernet 0. So I'm going to put Ethernet 0 there. Ethernet 0. On my actual Windows machine that I've been using to demo some things, my Ethernet is called Ethernet 3 with a space. So if you have a space, you definitely need to put it inside the double quotes. So in this case, I'm doing Ethernet 0. I want to set address name equal Ethernet 0. I want to set a static address, and I said for you to make the IP addresses in the 199 network. So I'm going to set 199.5, 255.0. These last two fields on the command are the gateway and the routing metric. We don't have a gateway, so we're not going to use that right now. and it doesn't like my address. Oh, I have an extra word in there. Static. So there we go. So that set my IP address without the extra word in there. So if we get out and type ipconfig, I now have my new IP address. On Linux, for years and years and years, I've used ifconfig to make network changes at the command line. But when I used ifconfig today, it did not work. So I guess it's finally time to move on from ifconfig. I didn't spend much time figuring out why it didn't work. It actually changed the IP, but it did not function properly. So if we look at the ifconfig man page, it says stop using this program with an exclamation point. So we're going to stop using that program today. So the replacement for ifconfig that I mentioned earlier is ipadder. So if we do ipadder list, that shows us what the IP address is. We have 99.6. If we do man IP and look at the options, we want to change we want to do IP adder short for address, and we want to change the IP address. Let's see if we can find some examples down here. No, there's no example. So I'll just have to tell you what it is based on my knowledge. And again, we need to use sudo because we're not root. Actually, I don't know if I said that before. We're logged in as student to do administrative things on Linux. We need root access. So ipadder, we want to delete the current IP address. We're doing that because I'm pretty sure it doesn't overwrite. When you add a new one, it keeps it. So I'm pretty sure that's the command to delete the IP. So that IP is gone. And then to add the new IP, we want to update the IP address, and then we want to do add. So that's the command to add. Sudo ipadder add the IP address. So if I look at the address now, I have that. So now I should be able to ping 192.168.199.5. That worked. And if I ping 192.168.199.6, that works. So that's how we use our non-graphical tools to make IP address changes. Couple things to know: when you use the non-graphical tools to make IP address changes on Linux anyway, if you look at the actual settings that are stored within the system, it was not updated. ipadder will change the IP address on the running system, but this setting it has is still the same. So what does that mean for you? That means if we turn the interface off and then turn it back on again and look at what it has, it went back to being what the GUI set it to. So that's important to know. I'm going to set it back to be what I want it to be for now. So the next step in the lab sheet says for you to reboot both systems and see what happens. Hopefully at this point I've demonstrated that if you turn the interface off and back on again, Linux comes up with the old address it used to have. So that's what's going to happen when you reboot. Once you reboot, it should come back up with 99.6, and you should recognize that to mean, hey, in the future, I probably should not be using ipadder if I want to make permanent address changes. You need to edit the settings where they can be stored permanently, and that's a bit outside of the scope of what we need to do today. So that is how you change the IP addresses. First part using the GUI tools, and this part using command line tools.